Good morning, and welcome to your daily news briefing. Today is Friday, June 19th, 2026. I'm glad you're with me this morning, because we have a lot to get through, and today of all days is one worth paying attention to. It's Juneteenth, a federal holiday that marks the moment in 1865 when enslaved people in Texas first learned they were free, more than 2 years after Abraham Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation. We'll come back to that. But we're going to start where the world's attention is this morning: a massive drone attack on the Russian capital. Ukraine launched what appears to be the largest drone strike on Moscow since this war began more than 4 years ago. And when I say large, I mean staggering in scale. The Russian Defense Ministry said it shot down 992 drones in a single day, countrywide, along with 4 long-range cruise missiles. That is the highest number ever recorded in a single attack in this entire conflict. Let that sink in for a moment. Nearly 1,000 drones in one day. What did they hit? An oil refinery southeast of Moscow, a facility that covers roughly 40% of the city's gasoline needs, caught fire, sending plumes of thick, greasy, toxic smoke billowing over entire neighborhoods. Residents in nearby areas woke up to what some described as an oily rain falling from the sky. The city's environment ministry told people to limit their presence outdoors. All 4 of Moscow's airports shut down for most of the morning before gradually reopening. Part of the ring highway that circles the city, a metropolis of 13 million people, was closed. At least 17 people were injured in the Moscow region. Ukraine's drones also struck the city's largest open-air market and forced one of Moscow's biggest shopping malls to close. A drone even hit a residential high-rise in a suburb. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine was blunt about what he wanted this attack to mean. He said, in a voice memo shared with journalists, "If Ukraine burns, then your Moscow will burn as well." He cast the strike as a direct response to Russia's bombardment of Kiev earlier this week, a barrage that left a historic cathedral at one of Ukraine's holiest sites in flames, killed 5 people, and injured 35 others. Here's the strategic picture that reporters Paul San and Natalia Vasilyeva laid out in their coverage. Ukraine has been escalating a campaign to bring the war home to ordinary Russians who live far from the front lines in eastern Ukraine. And it's working, at least psychologically. A Moscow resident, a 44-year-old man who identified himself only by his first name, Nikolai, because of the risk of retaliation, described his working-class neighborhood waking up to confusion and fear. He said neighbors were going around asking, "How is that possible?" He described it as anger and confusion, but said people still couldn't quite connect the dots between Russia's invasion of Ukraine and these attacks on their own city. He put it this way: "It's like they were told for a long time not to look up. And now it's as if they have lifted their heads for the first time, and it's impossible not to look up." Now, this war has now run longer than World War I. And Russian drone attacks on Ukrainian oil refineries, the kind of sustained campaign Ukraine has now turned around on Russia, have already been causing fuel lines and rationing at gas stations across dozens of Russian regions. The economic pressure is mounting. So is the political pressure. Russian hardliners are furious. Andrei Gurylev, a former general and a lawmaker in Russia's governing party, went on Russian television and said, "We must strike the enemy mercilessly, without hesitation." He called on the Kremlin to eliminate Ukraine's entire leadership, destroy all command centers, and bring Ukraine's industrial sector to its knees. That is the kind of rhetoric that signals an escalation is possible and possibly coming. Here's the most sobering line in all of this reporting, and it comes directly from San and Vasilyeva: "How much further Russia, which has the world's largest nuclear stockpile, can go with its conventional arsenal is unclear." That sentence is worth sitting with. This war is far from over. And the way things are trending, it could get considerably worse. Now, let's turn to another front of global tension: the United States, Iran, and the fallout from a preliminary peace deal that is already proving deeply divisive. The short version: the United States and Iran reached a preliminary agreement this week to halt hostilities. The deal lifts the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports, grants Iran waivers to export its oil, and reopens the Strait of Hormuz to commercial traffic for 60 days. In exchange, Iran has to allow free passage through that strait. The nuclear program, the whole reason the war started, the existential issue for both countries, gets kicked to a later round of negotiations. And now the deal itself appears to be unraveling. Switzerland, which was hosting follow-on talks, announced that those talks have been postponed. Israel, meanwhile, launched new airstrikes in Lebanon. The region is not settling down. Why does this deal matter so much? Because the critics, and there are many, say it gives Iran enormous economic benefits while asking very little of them in return. One analyst, Nicole Grajewski, who teaches at Sciences Po in Paris and studies Iranian foreign policy, put it plainly: on balance, the memorandum appears to favor Iran. Tehran secures movement towards sanctions relief, a pathway for the restoration of oil exports, access to economic benefits, and a reduction in military pressure while making relatively limited new nuclear commitments. Iran's economy had been in freefall: a collapsing currency, sky-high inflation, 3 rounds of major protests in recent years, all triggered in large part by economic desperation. This deal gives the Iranian government a financial lifeline. The prospect of resumed oil sales alone could bring in billions of dollars. One former U.S. Treasury official warned that the deal's banking waiver provisions would crack the core architecture of U.S. oil and financial sanctions against Iran. Former Trump officials, ironically, are among the critics. And the deal's defenders say it opens a new chapter in U.S.-Iran relations and that decades of coercive policy hadn't worked anyway. Late-night hosts had a field day. Jimmy Kimmel called it the Treaty of Versailles because it was actually signed at the Palace of Versailles. He said the deal was essentially Iran gets billions of dollars, and then we'll talk about a deal. It's a deal to make a deal. Jordan Klepper quipped that we basically go back to where we were before the war, except Iran gets $400 billion. But if the United States is taking incoming from its own political circles, the fallout in Israel is something else entirely. Israel woke up this week to what analysts are calling a diplomatic earthquake. The deal accomplishes none of Israel's stated war aims. None of them. Regime change in Tehran? The Iranian government is still there, and some analysts say it's emerging more hardened and emboldened than before. Iran's ballistic missile program? Not addressed in this agreement. Iran's support for Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other militia groups? Also not in the deal. The nuclear program, the thing Prime Minister Netanyahu has spent his entire career warning about? Deferred to a future negotiation that nobody is confident will succeed. And on top of all that, the deal actually constrains Israel militarily in Lebanon by requiring Israeli forces to withdraw from that country. One Israeli analyst on Channel 12 News likened the deal to a diplomatic October 7, meaning a cataclysmic surprise for which Israel was wholly unprepared. Former Deputy National Security Advisor Chuck Freilich said flatly, Iran came out stronger, and I believe is now the regional hegemon. They stood up to the US, the global superpower. They can have missiles, and there's nothing in the agreement about the nuclear issue except we'll talk about it. Vice President J.D. Vance delivered what was described as an unusually blunt message to Israeli critics in Washington and Jerusalem who have been attacking the deal. He said, Donald J. Trump is the only head of state in the entire world who is sympathetic to the nation of Israel at this moment in time. And then he added, if I was in the cabinet of the Israeli government, I might not be attacking the only powerful ally that I have anywhere left in the entire world. Gulf states Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain are also frustrated. These are countries that were repeatedly targeted by Iranian missile and drone attacks during the war. Airports, energy facilities, hotels, military installations, they took real hits. And this deal does nothing to address Iran's missile and drone capabilities. Analysts say Gulf governments are quietly wondering whether they can really rely on Washington as a security guarantor anymore. Some are reportedly exploring the idea of diversifying away from dependence on the United States, though that would take a decade or two at minimum. All right. Let's move to some domestic stories, because there is a lot happening inside the United States today. A Times exclusive broke this morning. Immigration and Customs Enforcement spent approximately $700 million buying 7 warehouses to serve as mass detention facilities for immigrants. And now, the agency wants to get rid of them. Here's the backstory. The Trump administration, under then Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, purchased more than a dozen empty warehouses across the country at a total cost of about $1 billion, with the goal of massively expanding immigrant detention capacity. The idea was to supercharge mass deportations. But the plan ran into a wall of problems almost immediately: environmental lawsuits over lack of proper impact reviews, community opposition even in conservative areas, congressional investigations, a federal judge blocking construction in Maryland, and mounting legal challenges in New Jersey and Michigan. The facilities would also have required enormously expensive renovations to become habitable for human beings: proper water, sewer, ventilation, all of it. Now, under new Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin, who was privately skeptical of the plan from the start, the agency is planning to either give away or sell 7 of those warehouses. The ones it's moving forward with, in Texas, Arizona, and Maryland, are still facing legal challenges. This is a significant reversal. It raises obvious questions about the original decision-making, about the $1 billion spent, and about whether the administration can actually achieve deportation numbers at the scale it promised during the campaign. On a different environmental front, there was better news. The Trump administration backed off its plan to dismantle a $368 million ocean monitoring system. The National Science Foundation had announced in May that it would begin removing hundreds of underwater instruments sensors anchored to the seafloor off the coasts of Oregon, Washington, Alaska, and North Carolina that collect data on coastal flooding, marine heat waves, ocean currents, and other climate phenomena. The stated reason: saving $48 million a year in operating costs. The Senate passed a bipartisan bill by unanimous consent to block that removal. Both Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Democratic Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon were incensed. Murkowski said the NSF didn't even bother to check in with Congress before beginning to pull instruments out of the water. The administration reversed course and said it would pause dismantling the system while convening an expert panel. Some equipment has already been pulled from the water off Oregon and Washington, but the agency says it's developing plans to redeploy that equipment. A big Supreme Court ruling this week: the justices unanimously narrowed a federal law that had banned drug users from owning guns. The case involved a Texas man named Ali Hamani who told federal agents he used marijuana regularly. He was charged under a section of the Gun Control Act of 1968 that bars anyone who is an unlawful user of or addicted to any controlled substance from possessing firearms. Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote the opinion, and all 9 justices agreed on the outcome, though several wrote separately to explain their reasoning. The court's decision was described as narrow. It struck down the government's ability to apply this law to recreational drug users, but explicitly left open the question of whether addicts or people who are currently intoxicated can be barred from owning guns. Justice Gorsuch said Congress could still pass more targeted legislation if it determined that users of particular drugs pose special dangers. The case drew some unusual coalitions. The Trump administration and Everytown for Gun Safety, the Bloomberg-backed group, both defended the law. The NRA and the ACLU were both on the side of striking it down. Justice Alito and Justice Kagan, one of the court's most conservative and one of its most liberal members, joined together in a concurring opinion where Alito wrote, "Marijuana use today is like alcohol use at the founding. It is widespread and increasingly considered socially acceptable in many quarters. This matters for the millions of Americans who live in states where marijuana is legal but where federal law has technically put them in legal jeopardy for owning a firearm." Now a story about the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool, the iconic pool that stretches between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. It's been a mess this spring. The Trump administration had the pool drained and resurfaced with a blue waterproofing coating as part of the preparations for the country's 250th birthday celebrations. The pool was refilled, and within days, algae. The water turned vibrant green instead of the American flag blue the president wanted. A Times investigation found that the National Park Service gave a no-bid contract worth $1.7 million to a water purification firm called Green Water Services, bypassing the competitive bidding process that federal law normally requires. Federal records show the firm's ultimate owner is tied to John J. Cafaro, a longtime Trump donor and neighbor of Mar-a-Lago. Cafaro has given more than $300,000 to political committees connected to Trump. He also has a history worth noting. He pleaded guilty in 2001 to conspiracy to bribe a congressman and later testified against that congressman. The Interior Department said it was not aware of Cafaro's political affiliation when it awarded the contract. A White House spokeswoman said the president was not involved. Meanwhile, workers were still out at the pool this week using hydrogen peroxide in vacuums to try to get rid of the algae, while a section of the new blue waterproofing appeared to have peeled off the bottom of the pool and floated to the surface. Let's talk about something more celebratory. The Obama Presidential Center officially opened in Chicago on Thursday, on the south side of the city, in Jackson Park. This has been a long time coming. Barack Obama first announced the museum would be built in Chicago in 2015. More than a decade of planning, legal battles with preservationists, and construction delays later, it's finally here. The opening was a star-studded celebration featuring 4 former presidents on stage: George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Joseph Biden, and Obama himself. Musicians included Bruce Springsteen, Bono, Christina Aguilera, and The Roots. An invitation was notably not extended to President Trump. Michelle Obama gave a speech that moved her husband to tears. She said, "You did it all with such grace and class and cool that you made the hardest job in the world look like a walk in this beautiful park." She drew sharp contrasts between the Obama era and the current political moment without naming Trump directly. Barack Obama talked about arriving in Chicago more than 40 years ago, driving a beat-up car so stuffed with possessions he couldn't see out the rear window. He said, "It was here, in this city, the city of broad shoulders, that I found what I was looking for." And yes, there were tan suits. Multiple tan suits. Stephen Colbert, former late-night host, wore one. So did David Letterman and the Obama Foundation's board chairman, Martin Nesbitt. This was a deliberate, winking tribute to the infamous moment in 2014 when Obama wore a tan suit to a news conference and the political media spent days clutching their pearls over it. Nesbitt stepped back from the lectern to show off his suit in full and said it was inspired by a very good friend of mine, who made tan suits famous. The former president was overheard saying, "I love that tan suit." Tickets for the museum are already sold out through November. Now to some international news. In Britain, Andy Burnham won a parliamentary seat in a special election, and that victory has set off a wave of speculation about British politics. Burnham has been the mayor of Greater Manchester for 9 years, where he built a reputation as a charismatic, optimistic, plain-spoken politician. He's twice run for the leadership of the Labour Party and lost. But with Prime Minister Keir Starmer deeply unpopular and facing pressure from the right-wing populist Reform UK party, some Labour members see Burnham as a potential saviour and a potential Prime Minister. His nickname in Manchester was the King of the North. Whether he can translate that regional popularity into national leadership remains very much to be seen. In Niger, gunmen attacked the main airport in Niamey, the capital, for the second time this year. The attack happened in the early morning hours. 11 soldiers and 2 civilians were killed, along with 22 of the attackers. About 20 suspects were arrested. The January attack was carried out by Islamic State's Sahel affiliate. This one was claimed by JNIM, al-Qaeda's local affiliate in the region. Niger's military junta, which came to power in a 2023 coup, promised to restore security to the country, but since they took power, the violence has only gotten worse. Residents near the airport described waking up to gunfire and hiding in terror. In Afghanistan, the Taliban government has banned civil servants and military personnel from bringing smartphones to work. Those caught disobeying will have their phones smashed and face punishment. The order came from Afghanistan's Supreme Court. The justification, according to officials, is preventing the spread of pornography and what authorities called immoral behavior. WhatsApp has become the primary communication tool for much of Afghanistan's administration, so agencies are scrambling to find alternatives. It's just the latest in a long series of restrictions on individual freedom under Taliban rule. Let's talk about schools and AI cheating, because this is a story that is going to affect every family with kids in school. New tools allow students to cheat in ways that their makers say teachers and AI detectors can't trace. Here's how they work. So-called humanizers rewrite AI-generated text to make it sound less robotic, less like something spat out by ChatGPT. Autotypers slowly drip words into a Google Doc or Word document at a human-like pace, even simulating typos and corrections, so that when a teacher checks the version history of a document, it looks like the student actually typed the essay themselves. These tools are being marketed aggressively on TikTok and YouTube to high school and college students. Some companies are simultaneously selling AI detection tools to schools and AI evasion tools to students. The Times investigation found that even established companies like Grammarly are offering features that can help students evade detection while also offering schools tools to detect AI use. About 2/3 of American students are using AI regularly for schoolwork. Schools and colleges are struggling to keep up. Some educators are responding by moving toward oral exams and handwritten tests. Others are trying to figure out how to teach in a world where AI assistance is everywhere. On the topic of student loans, the Education Department announced it will temporarily lower interest rates on federal student loans by up to 1 percentage point, starting July 1st. The reduction is tied to enrollment in automatic payments. Borrowers who sign up for autopay will see the reduction. The department says just over a third of borrowers are currently keeping up with their loans, and they want that number higher. The benefit applies to loans disbursed after July 1, 2012, and runs through June 2028. For someone with $50,000 in debt at 8% interest, the reduction saves about $26 a month, not enormous, but real. Here's a delightful one. In France, high school students just took their annual philosophy exam. This is a big deal in France, a national rite of passage that hundreds of thousands of 17 and 18-year-olds take simultaneously across the country. This year's questions included, can one be happy when others are not, and do we have control of our words? Students also had the option to dissect a text from Nietzsche's 1878 book, Human, All Too Human. They have 4 hours. French philosophers go on the radio and television to discuss the questions. Local news outlets live blog the exam. The philosophy course was introduced by Napoleon in 1809 and has been part of French education ever since. As France's education minister put it, the exam says everything about who we are, that France is a country in which we have chosen to put the examination of opposing views and debate at the heart of education. Now to a concerning story out of a military base in Texas. Nearly 160 service members have fallen ill with the flu at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, a major training facility where new recruits sleep in open bays on bunk beds and share communal dining. One trainee, Kian McDaniel, died after falling ill last Friday. It's not yet clear whether his death was directly caused by the flu outbreak, and a medical review is underway. The timing matters enormously here. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth made the flu vaccine optional for military personnel just 2 months ago, in April. Before that policy change, the vaccine had been mandatory. In the weeks since, only about 40% of Air Force trainees at Lackland voluntarily got the shot. Following the outbreak, the Air Force issued an exception to Hegseth's policy, requiring all recruits at the base to now get flu shots. Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, a Republican and Air Force veteran who chairs the Armed Services Committee, had expressed skepticism about Hegseth's decision at the time, saying, "The reason it was mandatory was to enhance readiness. You do give up certain rights when you take the oath. It's just part of it." In New York, there was a legal development in the case of Luigi Mangione, the man accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson in December 2024. Mangione's lawyers abruptly withdrew their intention to argue that he was experiencing extreme emotional disturbance at the time of the killing, a defense that could have reduced the charge from murder to manslaughter under New York law. The withdrawal came just 1 day after a judge revealed that the defense had quietly filed notice of this strategy back in September. No explanation was given beyond a one-sentence letter to the court. Mangione's defense strategy now remains publicly unknown. His state trial is scheduled for September. Now for something that made all of New York beam with joy. The New York Knicks held their championship parade down Broadway through Lower Manhattan yesterday, the first such parade in the team's 80-year history. The Knicks won their first NBA title in 53 years. Fans packed the Canyon of Heroes, and by the police department's count, 10,000 officers were on hand. Mayor Zoran Mamdani rode on a float alongside the team. He said, "For as long as we live, we will remember this feeling of a city together, a city alive, a city overcome by happiness." Alicia Keys performed. The city's municipal buildings were illuminated in Knicks blue and orange. As Seth Meyers put it on Late Night, the first week of the Iran war alone cost $11 billion, and that was back in March. That's almost as much as it's going to cost to rebuild New York after the Knicks parade. On to the World Cup, which is now fully underway in the United States. Mexico beat South Korea 1-0 and clinched the top spot in Group A, though their own fans booed them at halftime before Luis Romo's goal and a remarkable late save from goalkeeper Raul Rangel turned the mood around. Canada posted its first ever win in a men's World Cup, thrashing Qatar 6-0. Switzerland beat Bosnia and Herzegovina 4-1, with substitute Johan Manzambi coming on near the end and scoring 2 goals. The United States faces Australia today, though Christian Pulisic, one of their key players, may not feature after leaving the opening win over Paraguay at halftime with what appeared to be an injury. And NJ Transit has been doing its best to get tens of thousands of fans to MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. The fares are steep, $98 round trip, and ridership has come in below initial projections. There are some rumblings about whether that budget shortfall will hit regular commuters. There's also a promising development on Penn Station, the famously miserable underground rail hub in Manhattan that serves more passengers per day than all 3 New York area airports combined. A Trump-backed plan has been released by Amtrak and its architects for a $7 to $8 billion, 6-year rebuild. The Times architecture critic Michael Kimmelman, who has been writing about Penn Station plans since the era of flip phones, called the new renderings promising and thoughtful. The plan would create a vaulted, daylit, stone and bronze civic gateway, remove more than 100 columns from the platforms, add stairs, elevators, and escalators, and buy and demolish a smaller theater attached to Madison Square Garden to create a ceremonial new entrance with natural light flooding in. Kimmelman wrote that the station rebuild recalls an era when civic space and public-spirited architecture was a national priority, which is saying something, given the current political climate. On a lighter note, Toy Story 5 opens in theaters today. The Times' chief film critic Manohla Dargis says it's fine, pretty and amusing, but that time has predictably taken its toll. The story involves Bonnie getting a tablet called Lillipad, basically a frog-shaped iPad with an authoritarian personality that zombifies her the way screens zombify children everywhere. Woody and Buzz are back, looking a bit worn. You can hear time passing in the voices of Tom Hanks and Tim Allen especially. Dargis says the filmmakers never quite push the interesting ideas far enough and spend too long on a dreary Pixar romance. So, probably fine for the kids, manage your expectations as an adult. Now for a moment of pause. The major oak, a centuries-old tree in Sherwood Forest in England, the tree legendary associated with Robin Hood, has died. It was between 800 and 1200 years old. The Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, which manages Sherwood Forest, announced the death this week. There was no single cause. The tree was killed by a web of factors. Millions of tourists compacted the soil around its roots to nearly 4 feet deep, making it rock solid and starving the roots of water and nutrients. Misguided conservation efforts over the decades introduced iron, lead, fiberglass, and even concrete into the tree. Recent heat waves and dry summers, consequences of climate change, pushed an already weakened tree past its limits. The tree's arborist put it bluntly, the climate is changing so fast in front of our eyes that these very old trees don't seem to be able to keep up. The major oak outlasted the reigns of 6 Henrys, 6 George, and 2 Elizabeths. Its acorns have been planted across Britain. The legend lives on. There's one more story worth mentioning before we close, not hard news, exactly, but a cultural observation that says something about this moment we're living in. Consumer products are starting to look a lot gooier. After years of the clean, sans serif, millennial pink minimalism that made everything look like a tech startup, a new visual style is emerging aimed at Gen Z, think blobby typography that looks like it came out of a Play-Doh factory. Vibrant, neon, almost painful colors. Packaging that looks like it was designed in Microsoft Paint. Pixelated graphics evoking early internet aesthetics. The argument is that in a world saturated with AI-generated imagery which tends toward sleek, hyper-polished perfection, consumers, especially young consumers, are seeking proof that a human actually made something. The worse it looks, the better it performs, as one creative director put it. There's something kind of lovely about that, actually, a generation demanding evidence of human imperfection as a marker of authenticity. Before I let you go, a word on the day itself. It's Juneteenth, a holiday that celebrates freedom, and invites us to sit with the complicated, unfinished work that freedom demands. Nicole Taylor, a cookbook author who wrote a beautiful book called Watermelon and Redbirds all about Juneteenth food traditions, offered this thought that I'll share with you. Even on the days that are not demarcated as holidays or holy days or special days, we should do special things for ourselves and the ones we hold dear. These small everyday traditions, these molecules of the ordinary, can have power and meaning, if we allow them to. Rituals of leisure and care are as much a testament to what Juneteenth has made possible as voting rights and desegregated buses are. If you're off today, cook something. Eat something delicious. Be with people you love. And carry Shirley Chisholm's reminder with you that we should measure America not by its achievement, but by its potential. That's your briefing for Friday, June 19, 2026. There's a lot happening out there. Thank you for spending part of your morning with me. I'll see you tomorrow.